And so it's important for us to understand here that there is still time to save this ceasefire deal as it stands right now. Hamas needs to keep to the terms that they have already agreed to in the phase one of this ceasefire deal. Now, US President Donald Trump did take this a step further and called for all hostages to be released this coming Saturday. All remaining hostages to be released. There's over 60 hostages still being held by Hamas. As far as we're concerned, and as far as Israel as a whole is concerned, if Gazans decide they want to stay in Gaza, as a whole, as a concept, that's fine. If they're saying that their claims over Israel and over the territorial land of Israel are no longer so, they're redundant and they want to stay in their homeland in Gaza, that is fine. Israel does not want to claim back Gaza. Israel is the side that unilaterally left Gaza back in 2005 with the hopes that the Gazan people could lead themselves effectively to a new and brighter future. What Israel has done is a very careful campaign in a very, very difficult urban warfare. Hamas, as I said earlier, has built over 350 miles of tunnel underneath Gaza, built these incredible subway systems, not for the use of transporting humans and individuals, not even for bomb shelters to secure and protect their own people, but rather as mechanisms to transport their militant arms and armies underneath the ground of Gaza to hide themselves with hostages surrounding them when need to for additional protection, Israeli hostages used as for additional protection.
So today we're speaking to Westropp-Evans, who is a media and communications specialist and a spokesperson and producer at the Israeli Citizens Spokesperson's Office. Welcome to CLRCUT, Asher.
Thank you so much for having me.
Right. So to begin with, I want to start off with both Trump and Netanyahu have currently threatened to resume fighting if the hostages are not released by this Saturday, which is February 15th. Do you think this fragile ceasefire will hold? And what will happen if it does not?
Look, certainly it's hard for us to predict what's going to happen in the future, even near future, as we're talking about this coming Saturday. But what we do know and the facts on the ground as they stand right now are this, that Hamas announced just a couple of days ago they were not going to be willing to uphold the terms of the ceasefire agreement and continue releasing hostages as they were scheduled to do this Saturday. The release of 3 additional hostages that was set for this Saturday has now, according to Hamas, been delayed. Now, obviously, we haven't hit that deadline yet. We're talking to you now on Wednesday morning here in Israel. And so it's important for us to understand here that there is still time to save this ceasefire deal as it stands right now. Hamas needs to keep to the terms that they have already agreed to in the phase one of this ceasefire deal. Now, US President Donald Trump did take this a step further and called for all hostages to be released this coming Saturday. All remaining hostages to be released. There's over 60 hostages still being held by Hamas for them to be released in their entirety. Doesn't look like that's going to happen, and Israel is not at this stage even calling for that much, but rather just to keep Hamas to the conditions that they agreed to in order for this ceasefire to happen. Israel does not want to return to war, but they do want the hostages back.
Right. On the other hand, while Hamas made this announcement that they're going to stop the release of hostages, they accused Israel of not sticking to the terms of the ceasefire agreement and violating the agreement details. So how does Israel respond to that then?
Frankly, these are ludicrous claims from Hamas, who are in their own always a bad faith actor. Israel knew when we took this ceasefire deal, that we were doing a deal with the devil, and obviously the devil doesn't play fair. Hamas certainly are, a rabid authoritarian militant group who are using any leverage that they can to try and stay in power, in order to keep their power over the people of Gaza, in order to keep the hostages, Israeli hostages, as a leverage tool and an insurance, so that they can remain in power and ensure that Israel won't do as it fully intends to do and wipe them out completely. Israel's goals in this war have always been to remove Hamas from power, to disarm and demilitarize the Gaza Strip, and to get rid of the de-radicalization of the Gazan people. But first and foremost is to remove Hamas, this militant authoritarian group that has led Gaza to nothing but wreck and ruin, as we've seen, through their time in what they call government. And let's remember, they are the government of the Gaza Strip by their own appointment. This is clearly not a group that can be dealt with reasonably, and Israel is trying their absolute best to ensure that we get our hostage back fairly. But as I said, it does mean making deals with the devil, and they are willing to do whatever they can to stay in power.
All right. Okay. So it seems that Israel has found a new friend in Donald Trump, as the US president has vowed to not only uh, help with the ceasefire deal, but also now he is vowed to forcibly remove Gazans from the Strip and build the so-called Riviera of the Middle East, right? Apart from several other countries rejecting Trump's plan and terming it as ethnic cleansing, within Israel, there have been many protests against resuming the fight, resuming the war as well, right? So, what are the views within Israel on Trump's radical plans shifting away from U.S. policy for which has been there for so many decades to take over Gaza, literally own it?
Mm. I think an important thing to remember about U.S. President Donald Trump's statements about removing Gazans from Gaza is primarily to understand a few key things here. One, the conversation around what to do with Gaza and how to understand the future of Gaza has effectively been stalled since arguably 2005, or maybe you could say 2007. Obviously, when Israel removed itself unilaterally from the Gaza Strip, handed power back to the Palestinian people there for them to take back control. And then, of course, they proceeded to duly elect the Hamas militant organization, militant terrorists, as their leaders, who have been in power without further elections since then. The goal here is to shift the negotiation window to try and have people understand that the reality on the ground calls for radical solutions. That what we saw on October 7th, 2023, was the result of almost, at that point, 2 decades of Hamas rule over the Gaza Strip, and the sort of goals of this organization, which were to retain power, to use what should have been infrastructure built for civilian purpose to help better the lives of Gazans, instead turned to militant purposes. Over 350 miles of tunnel built under the Gaza Strip. That's more than the New York City metro built under Gaza for the use of terrorist infrastructure, and obviously the co-option of other civilian infrastructure, mosques, schools, UNRWA facilities, and more used by Hamas. So what we need to understand clearly here is that if there is to be any sort of stability, peace, and security for the people of Gaza, for the people of Israel, for the civilians who've been caught in this bloody crossfire, it is so important that we remove Hamas from power and that we have some sort of solution that helps to better the future of the Gazan people. Now, whether that be some sort of relocation of Gazan refugees, self-proclaimed Gazan refugees, of which there are almost 1.6 million who are registered by UNRWA, a UN organization, inside Gaza as refugees, to relocate refugees, as is done throughout the world, to areas where they can live in safety and security, or whether it be to leave the people of Gaza in place and rebuild without Hamas in power. Whatever the solutions of the future may be, it is important that we think about all potential ideas and possibilities with the recognition that Hamas cannot be left in power.
Right. So I understand the fact that, all right, Israel does not want Hamas to be there. And so for Gazans to remain there, rebuild, seems like something that even the Palestinians would be ready to do. However, Trump's plan is completely different, right? He's saying the 1.9 million refugees who were made refugees because they were asked to move to safer zones within the Gaza Strip, on and on, many times, and now they're being. I feel that, like, the irony is there that now they're being asked to move out, and then there is no guarantee if Trump will ever let them come back. And not only
Let,
that, he is also claiming that Trump is also planning to build it that the people of the world will live here and that Palestinians will not be allowed to come back. So that's
Let's be,
that's
let, let's be
yeah.
let's be clear about something here, though. I want to make something very clear. The 1.6
Mhm.
million UNRWA registered refugees that we're talking about were not
Mhm.
refugees that were registered over the course of the war since October 7th, 2023. We're talking about
Okay.
1.6 million Gazans, people who now reside in Gaza, who were registered back by the UNRWA from their grandparents or so, or them if they're older, back in 1948, 49, after the War of Independence that initially founded the state of Israel. Those are the refugees we're talking about. They claim that their right to return home is to return to what is the country of Israel. They do not
Mhm.
want to stay within Gaza in accordance with UNRWA's own rulings. Now, as far as we're concerned, and as far as Israel as a whole is concerned, if Gazans decide they want to stay in Gaza, as a
Mhm.
whole, as a concept, that's fine. If they're saying that their claims over Israel and over the territorial land of Israel are no longer so, they're redundant and they want to stay in their homeland in Gaza, That is fine. Israel does not want to claim back Gaza. Israel is the side that unilaterally left Gaza back in 2005 with the hopes that the Gazan people could lead themselves effectively to a new and brighter future. At that point, we were talking about a Singapore of the Middle East at that point. The hope was that Gaza would be able to build itself as a functioning and flourishing city-state with its neighbor Egypt, which it shares a border, a fantastic trade partner, and potentially down the road, maybe even Israel. Now, obviously, that didn't happen when Hamas took power. And that's what we're talking about here. The reality that we need to shift the conversation to understand where the Gazan people actually want to live. Do they want to stay in Gaza? Fine. Let them stay. That's absolutely no problem. It's invading the territorial sovereignty of Israel that is the problem. And if we need to move them to another area because they are truly refugees and they need to be moved to somewhere of safety and security because so much of Gaza has indeed been destroyed, fine. That is another conversation that needs to be had. And that is what is done with refugees the world over in order to help them find peace, stability, and security.
This war has been going on for 15 months. Over 48,000 civilians, Palestinians have been killed. 1,100 people were killed on October 7th. Massive brutality on both sides. My question for the Israeli government, in a sense, is that during all this time, why couldn't Israel retrieve the hostages? Like, was there basically no alternative to the carpet bombing? Instead of the carpet bombing, was there no alternative to retrieve the hostages through some covert operation, especially considering the fact that Israel has one of the best intelligence and spy agencies? So was there any alternative to what Israel's Netanyahu's government has done over the past 15 months to retrieve the hostages?
I want to make a couple of terms very clear in what you've just said there. Firstly,
Sure.
Israel has never conducted carpet bombing. If you understand what carpet bombing is, I mean, we're talking about the Gaza Strip is an area of about 300 square kilometers. Carpet bombing,
Right.
in the classic sense, could level the Gaza Strip in its entirety. What Israel has done is a very careful campaign in a very, very difficult urban warfare. Hamas, as I said earlier, has built over 350 miles of tunnel underneath Gaza, built these incredible subway systems, not for the use of transporting humans and individuals, not even for bomb shelters to secure and protect their own people, but rather as mechanisms to transport their militant arms and armies underneath the ground of Gaza to hide themselves with hostages surrounding them when need to for additional protection, Israeli hostages used as for additional protection, but certainly underneath their own civilian population in order to hide and obfuscate their actions so that Israel cannot see this. That is what they have spent the last, since 2007 doing inside the Gaza Strip in order to try and defend and protect their own militant interests. Israel does not carpet bomb. Israel uses carefully targeted, pointed attacks in order to try and get to the Hamas militants that are buried and embedded inside civilian populations. Now, this is incredibly hard to do. With 2 million civilians in which they can hide behind, Hamas uses these human shields to try and obfuscate and protect from their own activities. And unfortunately, this has led to a situation where, yes, many thousands of Palestinian civilians have been killed, which is a terrible tragedy. No one is denying that. But what we need to be careful for is who we lay the blame on here. Because Hamas started this war on October 7th, 2023, when they invaded Israel, killing 1,200 people, taking another 250 plus people hostage, and then refusing to give those hostages back. They started this war, and they need to be held responsible for their actions, as they are the self-proclaimed government of Gaza. They claim to be a government, and yet they are not responsible. They're not being held responsible for their actions in harming civilians. They're not being responsible for helping to distribute aid or any of the facilities to help support their own people. Israel, time and time again, gets held responsible and accused of being the ones of taking this action, while Hamas themselves are treated as ghosts in the wind and like a force of nature, not truly as a militant government that they would claim themselves to be.
Right. The reason I use that term is because I was reading the statistics that about 80,000 tons of bombs have been dropped on that 300 square kilometers of area. And I was looking at a map where each bomb marked a red dot, right? And the whole area was covered. So which is why I use that term. Anyway, it's you don't want to term it carpet bombing, I understand that, but apart from, like, was there no way to retrieve the hostages even if in the long tunnels, because Israel was able to access the IDF was able to access these tunnels?
Well, we need to
Was
understand, I
there?
mean, what these tunnels are like. These are underground. We're not, again, we compare it to the New York City Metro, but it certainly isn't that sort of scale of nicety and intended for civilian use. As I said, it was never intended even as bomb shelters and protections for civilians. These are dark, dank rat holes, frankly, terror dungeons in which Hamas hides themselves, surrounded sometimes by hostages for protection, in order to use them further as human shields. And as I said earlier, their own civilians that they use as human shields. And Israel has been trying again for months to root these, militant terrorists out of their holes and to try and find the hostages safely. But they are talking about tunnels that are booby trapped. They are talking about tunnels where there are, militants, potentially terrorists hiding around every corner. Israel is trying its hardest, but this is one of the most complex modern urban battlefield environments in history. I mean, we can only look to the other major battles of the 21st century in urban environments. The Battle of Mosul, of course, in Iraq, which attempted to root out ISIS, that was there operating at the time. And if we even think to that battle, ISIS was only there for a few months, getting ready to, operate against Western forces that came in to try and root them out. And there still were close to 10,000 civilians killed in the attempt to root ISIS out of that area in just a few short months of military activity. This war has been going on for around 16 months now. And in
Mm.
those 16 months, it has been Israel's and the IDF's primary focus to try and recover the hostages safely and alive. And that is incredibly difficult to do. And Hamas knows this. And that's why they want to keep these hostages as insurance policies, because they love hiding behind civilians as human shields, where they can use them to protect themselves and fire their guns wildly as they continue to fire rockets at Israel. They continue to fire on civilians. I mean, let's remember as well, Israel dedicates so much of its rocket artillery and capability to its Iron Dome defense systems. Those are the same rockets that shoot down, militant actions from Gaza and Hamas, shoot down the rockets that are fired at us, whereas
Right.
Hamas doesn't even attempt to do the same thing to protect their own people.
Right. Uh, all right. So basically, you're saying that there was no other way for Israel to retrieve these hostages, and even if there was, it's a very complex problem, considering the
Indeed.
underground tunnels. All right. Uh,
I mean, wait, and I'll just add one thing to that, by the way.
yeah.
We heard
Yeah.
recently from released hostage Emily Damari that she said she was held within an UNRWA facility. Let's think about what that means here. UNRWA, the UN agency tasked with protecting Palestinians, was housing Israeli hostages inside their facilities. Now, it's unknown at this point whether the UNRWA staff and operators knew that that was going on. But how is Israel
Mm.
supposed to operate and try and retrieve its own people from inside UN-based facilities that are being used as bases in order to hold Israeli hostages in contravention of all manner of treaties and laws and international standards that exist around the world? I mean, that is unbearable positions, let alone, again, what Hamas do in schools, mosques, hospitals and others where they blatantly operate out from with direct tunnels leading into these facilities directly from underneath. Israel cannot operate freely and has no intention of trying to destroy these facilities unless they are blatantly and openly being used by Hamas and their militant like, which again we've seen time and time again.
So actually, my question is that you claim that there are these tunnels which and all these facilities are being used by Hamas. My question is, did now after 16 months of war, now that a fragile ceasefire was established, was Israel able to achieve its objective of eradicating Hamas, or did they fail in that position and now they have to make this negotiation?
Look, clearly, there's not going to be any pretense here in the part of Israel. All you have to do is look at the hostage releases that are being done every week. These sort of sick parades where Hamas, manages to put together a full service suite celebration, as it seems to be a ceremony, a signing ceremony, handing out goodie bags and whatever to these hostages that they've held and abused for now, close to 500 days. We see that Hamas is still obviously there. At this point, they put on their uniforms, they come out of their rat holes, as I said, and start to dress and look like the militant army that they indeed are. They normally operate. You don't see Hamas normally operating in uniform. They operate in civilian clothes again because it allows them to hide, to obfuscate, to claim that the dead that Israel have struck are actually civilians when we know full well that these are militant operatives. operating. And now, during these little sort of 6 ceremonies that they put together, they put on their uniforms, they bring out their guns, and you see them operating. So no, unfortunately, Israel has not yet succeeded in its goal of eradicating Hamas, but Israel will not return to the status quo that existed on October 6, 2023, in which a militant army with access to thousands, tens of thousands of rockets pointed directly at Israel, at some point, it's sometimes less than a kilometer from the border of Israeli communities, separated by less than a kilometer between Israeli and Gazan, the Gaza Strip and Israeli communities. Israel will not return to that status quo, and they will not accept that. And that is what we need to be talking about.
Right. So my follow-up to that is, if Israel did not achieve its target of eradicating Hamas clearly, why
Not yet.
not yet. Why did then they agree to a ceasefire right before Trump came into power?
I'll tell you why. Because Israel, at its core, values human life and the lives of its people more than anything else. Hamas, at its core, is a death cult. Their view is that they can use the deaths of their own martyrs, as they would call them, of their own civilian population, as a way to engender and empower their own militant cause. Israel, by contrast, and Hamas knows this, will do whatever it can to get its people back. And this is exactly the reason why the goal of Hamas was to take so many hostages on October 7th, because they knew that Israel would do whatever it could, even if it means putting itself in a compromising position, even if it means exchanging hostages for murderers released from Israeli prisons, murderers who have enacted brutal atrocities against civilians in the past. Israel will release them under the most strenuous of pressure because, unfortunately, we value the lives of all our people and will do whatever it can to get those people back. And this is the position that Israel has found itself in. This has nothing to do with US President Donald Trump. This has nothing to do with any external parties. This is Israel fighting for the right to get its people back home safe, so that we can reunite families, that civilians can be together, that children, women and children who have been held for so long, the sick, the elderly, the infirm that have been held for now almost 500 days in these Hamas terror dungeons can be returned. And frankly, the fact that this hasn't happened before now is sick and wrong. And now that this is the situation that's on the ground, no one is happy with it. Again, as I said earlier, everyone in Israel feels we are doing a deal with the devil. But unfortunately, when you are dealing with the devil, that is sometimes what you have to do. Now, what happens beyond this, whether phase 2 goes into effect to release the remaining hostages, and whether we're able to get to the position where phase 3 can happen, in which Gaza can be rebuilt in some form or another in order to move past this sort of heinous atrocities that we've seen in the past, we all hope we can get to that position somehow. But that will mean the removal of Hamas and their ilk from power.
Let's assume this ceasefire somehow miraculously is able to hold, and the hostage returns continues. We reach the phase 2, we reach phase 3. Gazans allowed to go back in. US President Donald Trump does not forcibly remove Gazans from Gaza by blackmailing or by threatening Jordan and Egypt to take them. How does Israel plan to move ahead with Hamas? Because Hamas is clearly there in large numbers. How do they plan to deal with them after this?
Well, this is the reality that we all have to face. And this is the reality that has, a multitude, a myriad of different possibilities in the future. But frankly, as I've said before, and I will reiterate clearly, the fact of the matter is we will not return to the October 6th status quo. And that is the goal of Hamas. They want to return. They wanted, after October 7th, by October 8th, they were saying, we were ready to, prepare a ceasefire, because they wanted to come into Israel, murder a bunch of people, come back with a whole slew of hostages to give them leverage of power. And then their hope was to return to a status quo, something that was being called for by their supporters in Qatar, in Iran, Turkey, and of course, South Africa, who later joined in their support. They would have loved to have seen that, Israel getting struck and then just let's return back to what it was. But Israel understood then and still understands now that we cannot return to that status quo, because it is intolerable that Israel and its people and its civilians will be unable to sleep safely in their beds at night, knowing that these militant armies could be coming for them at any moment, and they will not allow that to occur. Now, what you spoke about in terms of Donald Trump's arrangements and his conversations with Jordan and Egypt, I want to say, by the way, we saw just today how effective that those could potentially be. as a result of the statements that Donald Trump made, we've seen King Abdullah, who's visiting King Abdullah of Jordan, who's visiting the US president in Washington, D.C. at the moment, has just agreed to accept 2,000 Palestinian children who are in need of medical care into Jordan in order to help and treat them. Now, that is an
Right.
outcome that I think everyone can support. The idea that sick, unwell, injured, or whatever they may be, Palestinian children being taken in by their neighbors in order to help to be revitalized, to be healed, to be supported. That is something we can all agree on. And I don't agree that we should be using Palestinian civilians as sort of pawns in a sick game of chess in order to say that they need to stay there in order to protect Gazan interests in the region. Refugees should be
Right.
allowed the right to resettle if they want. And a number of Palestinians have indicated from Gaza in the past that if given the opportunity, they would love the chance to resettle in Egypt or Jordan. Whether those countries would accept them is, of course, a different matter. But the leverage that's being put out by Donald Trump, I will say, is certainly helping to shift some of the conversations that are being had around that, whatever the eventual outcome may actually be.
Just to add on to that, Ashur, King Abdullah did offer that Jordan will be ready to take in 2,000 cancer affected or sick Palestinian kids to treat them medically, but despite after his meeting with Trump, he and the Arab community have been steadfast in their position that they do not want the relocation, the forced relocation of Palestinians into either Jordan or Egypt. And he
Okay, but
himself
then
has
they need to
tweeted that
come.
and
They need to
reiterated that
come to
position.
the negotiating table. They need to come to the table and actually offer some alternatives. Israel would love nothing more than for its allies in the Arab world, in the neighborhood, to come to the table and say, "We will help to offer alternatives." Now, whether that be a rebuilding plan, whether that be a governance structure. I mean, Israel has been calling on the likes of Egypt, Jordan, the UAE, and other moderate Arab states that surround us in the region to come to the table with a plan for how we're going to move past Hamas. I mean, you want to talk about possibilities?
I
Obviously,
was just
again,
adding on to what King Abdullah said today,
mm,
and he, even though he is against the relocation of Gazans from, he's against Trump's plan. He did offer to accept 2,000 kids to treat them because they're sick, and also pointed out that Egypt is coming up with another plan, and they will be getting back to the negotiating table and deciding what to do in the future. My last question is, speaking on internal politics, right? This 15-month, 16-month war obviously has been quite brutal for Israel as well, and especially politically for Netanyahu. Since the war started, public sentiment against Netanyahu seems to have shifted, turned sour. So, what is your view? And apart from that, if the war was not enough, there is also the corruption trial that Netanyahu faces. So, within Israel, there have been quite a few protests against Netanyahu. What are the public sentiments for him right now in Israel?
look, one of the beautiful things about Israel, and particularly I will say beautiful within this particular region where it's not so common, is that it is a democracy. It is a vibrant and thriving democracy in which the future political leadership of the country will be determined at the ballot box at the next election. I won't. I'm not going to sit here and speculate on what this side of the country or that side of the country may view of the current government. Obviously, there are a range of views, and that is the wonderful thing here, that there will always be a range of views, that there is freedom to protest if there needs to be, but also people understand their duties in supporting the state. We've seen, unbelievable IDF reservists, 300,000 soldiers called up over 16 months, and the rest of the country coming to the fore to help and assist and support Israelis from all over. When over 60,000 Israelis were internally displaced from the north of the country because of ongoing bombardment from Lebanon, the rest of the country stood up to help and support them. The government came forward to help provide subsidies and help house and help those people who were displaced from their homes for well over a year, who only now potentially maybe can return. Although we haven't even touched really on the situation in Lebanon right now, but whether or not that will remain stable. This is the gift of Israel in this region, and this is what Israel will always stand for: is democratic, liberal, free principles that will allow a government, whether popular or otherwise, to be heralded at the next election at the ballot box, and people can make their decision there and cast their vote there. So I won't speculate on what else is going on internally in Israel at the moment, but to say that we'll see how that all plays out in time.
Right. So I understand that the right to protest in a democracy is a beautiful right to have, and I agree. My question was aimed at was to understand that despite Israel standing behind as one, are there divisions within Israel against Netanyahu? Do they think that because of him the war has gone on for so long, or because of him the hostages weren't released on time, or it is because of him that now Israel faces threats from Lebanon, from Hamas? Do they blame him? And apart from that, do they find any kind of weight in charges of corruption against him and his wife?
I would think the most important thing for us to focus on now when we're talking about assigning blame, when it comes to the militant organizations, the ring of fire, sort of puppeteered by Iran, the Iranian regime, around Israel. The key focus of blame, of course, is always on those militants who would choose to rather, enact brutal actions against Israel, to attack the Israeli people, and of course to use their own civilians as human shields in trying to enact their own, authoritarian interests in and around the region. I think that's where the Israeli people predominantly direct their blame. As I said, not to give a repeat answer, but when it comes to the internal elements of Israeli politics, well, that will all play out at the next election. So there's no point really in me speculating, on individual views here and there. Are there divisions within Israel and Israeli politics, and the Israeli sort of views inside the country? Of course there are. Again, that's a democracy, and that's the beauty of a democracy. That there are divisions, there are people who would support or oppose certain policies or certain ideas. But again, in a democracy, that is the nature of the game. That is how it should be played. And frankly, I think that is a sign of a good, healthy, and strong democracy, which Israel still is, and will continue to be, for many, many, many years to come. This is a critical element of the nation. This is a critical part of our identity. But again, I want to say the focus needs to be on those who would wish to harm, murder, kill, destroy, Israelis in their beds at night as civilians as they try and sleep soundly, and would risk their own people and putting their own people in harm's way to do so. And we've seen what becomes of those organizations. We've seen what have become of the puppets of Iran as they've attempted to attack Israel. They've caused only rack and ruin to their own organizations, and of course to their own peoples, and in some cases to their own countries. And we really here in Israel just hope and pray that doesn't continue, and that people realize it would be far better for us to all be supportive and good neighbors in this region, and all help to build and strengthen each other and our interests, rather than fighting, maiming, murdering, and killing.
Right. Well, thank you so much, Asher. Thank you for being here.